Okay, good. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Condo Insider. My name is Jane Sugimura, and I am your host for this episode. Condo Insider is a show for people who live and work in condos, and we hope that we're able to give you some relevant and important information to make your life with condos easier and more productive. And today on my show, my guest is Senator Sharon Moriwaki, and we're going to be talking about a bill that she introduced and why she introduced it. It's Senate Bill 729 about board education and training. And so, that's what we're going to be talking about today on our show. Okay, we're Senator Moriwaki. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Jane, for inviting me, and also for bringing up this bill on Condo Insider. Really appreciate.
And why don't you tell our listeners what district you represent?
I'm in Senate District 12, one of the most condo-dense districts. With it covers Waikiki, Kaka'ako, and some of Makali, Mo'ili'ili. So
you got a lot of constituents that are going to be affected by this bill, right?
Yes, that's right.
And I expect you got a lot of input on the bill when it was introduced. I mean, and that's what makes it relevant. To have legislators who have constituents who are going to be affected by the bills that they introduce. And so for the people who are listening and don't know what Senate Bill 729 is all about, right now the version that is now floating around that's going into conference is Senate Bill 729, Senate Draft 1, House Draft 2, which means that the Senate has made some changes and the House has made some changes. And so it's a little bit different than the bill that you introduced, but right now it requires the auditor to conduct a sunrise analysis on proposed regulatory controls for board members of condos, and it requires the Real Estate Commission to develop a curriculum to be made available to board members of condos. Can you tell our listeners why you introduced this bill?
Yes, I think this bill is one of many solutions we've been thinking about for many years. We've gotten so many complaints about board members, property management agents, and the board makes the decision for the condo. As you know, the condo is a different animal than having a single family home. You live with all of your neighbors in one building or a couple of buildings, and you all have to get along, and you have and you elect a board that represents all of you in terms of how do you keep the property well maintained, how do you make sure that everyone gets along, and the staff handles all the repairs and answers all the questions. Well, part of the problem is that sometimes the board members, who are all volunteers, don't really know their roles and their fiduciary duty, which means they've got to take care of the building on your behalf as owners. So this bill was a result of seeing that a number of board members didn't know their duties, did not know the governing documents, that is the law of how you operate in the condo, and also did not know how to operate or manage their meetings. And so all of this, we felt that it might be very helpful to have all board members go through some training. Also, there's two parts of it, as Jane has mentioned. First was know what your governing documents are. That means it's your bylaws, your articles of incorporation, and your house rules. It tells you how everybody should behave nicely in the building together. And then there's also another part of it, which is training on what is my duty as a board member. What do I need to do? What are some of the decisions I need to make on behalf of everybody in the condo? And sometimes we neglect. I know in some instances we've had complaints because board members want to get reelected, so they don't want to raise the maintenance fees, and yet they've got to raise fees because your fees pay for your electricity, pay for your upkeep, your repairs, your grounds. So with the costs are increasing, especially utility costs, they will require you to pay for those bills all together collectively. So you may see increase in maintenance fees. The other part of it is what they call reserve. And that's for your capital improvements. And a number of our buildings are getting very old and they haven't been fixed, like with spalling and a painting need required, or the pipes are rusting. And so these are major costs. In our building, we had a gantry that moves back and forth and cleans the windows. That was $2 million, which was unexpected. So now how do you pay for that? So the board is responsible, working with the property management company. How do we pay for it? Sometimes you can increase the maintenance fees, but other times you may have to take out a loan, or you have to do what they call a special assessment. All of these are on the shoulders of the board. They represent your interests and have to make prudent decisions. And without training and without knowing what is involved, I think sometimes the board gets itself into a situation where they're blamed for a lot of things going wrong. So we feel that this bill is the first step. I also think owners should get trained and real estate agents should get trained so they can tell people this is what living in a condo is. It's different than having your own home. You share the costs, but you also share the responsibilities. So that's why this bill was brought up. We have a number of bills, as Jane has told you many times. The condos are self-governing. They're supposed to be. That's why we have these articles of incorporation and board rules, house rules, because you're self-governing. That means all of the governing documents tell you how to operate within your board. And we've been getting a number of requests for bills to be introduced to eliminate proxies, to elect board members, term limits for board members, ombudsman bills, having somebody that we appoint from the state to solve your disputes. But basically, it all comes down to not all condos, those condos with problems wanting somebody like us to fix the problem. And so this bill was introduced so that we could at least get some of these rules and how boards operate and how what their duties are and how board members are responsible to look at their governing documents and how they operate and should operate on behalf of their association, their neighbors. And so I think it's an important bill. As Jane says, been through a number of committees, and at first, because it included other different kinds of associations where people live together, co-ops and what is it called, community associations, that it got a little bit divided in how the bill was moving forward. And that's why, as Jane said, this bill has the vestiges of that, where they're looking at it's a regulation because they haven't been regulated, and we require a sunrise analysis. But for the most part, this bill, as it's going through, and I hope we can get through, focused only on what is called Chapter 514B. That is the condo association law on how we operate. And I'm hoping that we will be able to pass the bill. Some of you may remember that One Archer Place had a problem with the board being accused of not giving enough notice and not really helping the residents and owners with a $6 to $7 million capital improvement cost that was unanticipated. And so they had to go through raising the maintenance fees and or a special assessment where individual unit owners had to foot the bill in some way. And it was unexpected, and the number of people were caught off guard. Those are the kinds of things that a board training would get to, is how do you give notice? How can you work with the residents ahead of time instead of being shocked, at the last minute having to come up with money?
Well, Senator, what you were talking about with the One Archer Lane situation. In that situation, the board did the right thing. They hired experts to come, and I guess there were several meetings where owners were invited to attend. But I guess some of these owners did not, come to the board meetings to hear what the consultants had to say. And, this was an older building. And, when you're talking about small repairs, I mean, these repairs are not cheap, right? And so what I think, and I don't have any personal knowledge of what I recall from looking at the newspaper article and watching, the TV coverage on the One Archer Lane incident, it looked like, over the years, the association was not raising their maintenance fees in an amount sufficient to cover these repairs. In other words, if in the past they had raised their maintenance fees higher, they wouldn't have had to do the special assessment in 2022, right? I mean, that was the gist of it. And I guess the homeowners got caught off guard because they said, well, nobody told us. But, if the board had, raised maintenance fees in the past, I mean, these same people who would have grumbled about you didn't tell us would have been grumbling about why are you raising our maintenance fees, right? And I think that's why you're saying that not only do the board have to be trained on how to communicate to the owners have to be trained or educated to know that it costs money to maintain the building and keep it safe and marketable, right? Because if you don't take care of your building, it's not marketable because, there'll be deficiencies that, will have to be disclosed to prospective buyers, like the city council passed that fire safety ordinance, right? And so with all the older buildings, you have 270 buildings in Honolulu that can't even pass the life safety evaluation. And that sends a terrible message to prospective, buyers. They say, why should I buy that building? Buy a unit in that building? I mean, here's this public report that says, they're not safe. And, so it's very harmful to get this type of information out. Although the life safety evaluation was not intended to be an assessment. I mean, it was just like a picture in time as to what needs to be done to a building, so it wasn't intended to be an assessment about whether it was, about the structural, structural ability of the building, right? And that's what you're talking about, right? Both sides have got to be educated so that you don't have this confrontation that ends up with demonstrations and, the TV article and other condos are looking at it saying, is this going to happen to us? And so what you're saying is that when, the owners and boards have got to talk to each other and owners have to understand that it costs money to take care of a building, especially an older building, and so they have to, and that comes from maintenance fees. That means they got to learn to pay them increased maintenance fees because during that One Archer Lane, the people that were being interviewed say, hey, I paid $500 maintenance fees and I kind of thought it was going to stay at 500. I mean, that's unrealistic. That's very unrealistic. I mean, so, those types of owners have to understand that, your maintenance, I mean, the association has to pay bills just like a homeowner has to pay bills. If the electricity goes up, that means your costs go up. And just because you live in a condo does not mean your maintenance fees are going to stay at $500 forever. I mean, that is very unrealistic, and $500, for monthly maintenance fees in a downtown building is very cheap, very, very cheap. And so,
I think that you bring up, Jane, and in this board training, it's just one part of it. It's not the silver bullet, right? But it's if we get this condo training packet together, and the real estate commission, which does collect fees from all of us who live in condos, can prepare the materials, can put it online, not just for the board members, but for owners as well, because then you know what to require of your board members. One of the testifiers in opposition said, well, we shouldn't have this and require board members to go through training or read the governing documents. On the other hand, because it'll discourage people from being on the board, it's hard to get people on the board. But on the other hand, if you live in a building, or if it were your own home, single family, you would want to know everything about your home and how you take care of it and the costs. And it's nothing different than being in a condo. that everybody should want to know, how is the building being maintained? If the costs go up, I'd like to know, as Jane says, I'd like to know that's coming up this month, and I can prepare and save for it, because I know that we're going to have to do something about the spalling, because I can see the concrete, cracks in the building. Then everybody is aware, and it makes life easier, because we're all in it together. Right now, we're just putting it all on the shoulders of 8, sometimes 5 people, and all of them volunteers. So it's a very difficult situation. You rely on your property management company, and sometimes they're good, and sometimes they're not so good. But a board that comes in and says, this is what our residents need, to the property manager, can require the property manager to do more research, to do a better reserve study, to look at what the costs are. So all of this in the training gives us board members who are much more informed and caring for the building and for the neighbors. So I think that was the purpose of the board training and the board training curriculum that would cover these kinds of things.
Yes, and when in drafting this bill, what was your intent? What was this bill supposed to do?
Just that it was to require of board members. I've been a board member, and when the first time I got on, you've got all these documents, and you've got the law, and not everybody has the time to read it, because we're all volunteers. But if we read through it, it is from how do you conduct the meeting? What is the annual meeting about? Who is the property manager? And annually you have a budget. So it's to let people know, this is what not only as a board member is required of me, but also what I have a fiduciary duty, my duty to my neighbors in the condo are. And then with the condo owners, being also aware what that is, and to work with the board members who represent you. And one of the things that sometimes board members don't know is they will come on the board and talk to their individual friends or neighbors on the board, and they'll try to change some of the rules and work directly with their neighbors. Well, that's a no-no, because the board has to make a decision. The board makes a decision. Well, all of that should be in a training program for board members, so you can act accordingly to make the condo work properly.
Right, and this statute too. I mean, it even though it is a general statute, it offers some guidelines as to how you can satisfy and comply with your fiduciary duty. And one of the things that is specifically mentioned in the statute is the business judgment rule. And I tell my new board members, I said, if you want to know what you have to do, the most important thing is the business judgment rule, and it's in the statute. And it basically acknowledges that you as a volunteer board member don't have a clue. We know you don't have a clue, okay? So if you don't know, you got to ask. That's what the business judgment rule says. In order to comply with your fiduciary duty, if you don't ask, in other words, if you have a plumbing problem, you're not a plumber, and you got to go out and get expert testimony. And that doesn't mean you ask your Uncle Joe, who is a plumber, to give you free advice. And this is the kind of stuff you would learn in the training, that you need to go out and get somebody with expertise, pay for their opinion, because boards are notorious. They don't want to pay for anything, but they have to, because that's what the business judgment rule says. You go to a consultant, you pay them for their expertise, you ask them for a report to tell you how to make a decision. And if you rely on that decision, even if it turns out in the end that it was a wrong decision, you as a board member have complied with your fiduciary duty, because you've complied with the business judgment rule. That says if you don't have a clue, you go out and you find an expert, you pay them for their expertise to tell you how to address the issue that you're making a decision on, and you get information. And if you don't like that expert's recommendation, you go and get another expert. You can go out and get several experts, and then you make your decision. And if you make your decision based on that, the information that you have gotten from experts that you've paid for, And that means you've complied with your business judgment rule, you've complied with your fiduciary duty, even if that decision turns out to be wrong. And you're covered by your D&O, carrier, your insurance. And so, to me, I mean, that's the one thing I impress on my new board members. You got to know the business judgment rule. And so if you're sitting there in a meeting and you don't know, you got to ask, say, oh, I don't understand. Can we have somebody come in and tell us what exactly is the problem with this electrical malfunction in our building? Because I don't understand why we got to pay $500,000 to fix it. And that's a good question. You're a board member. You're being asked to, look at contracts or consider a repair that is going to cost a lot of money. And you should be asking questions, and I think, board members, when they're sitting there, they don't want to do that because they, oh, if I ask this question, I'm going to look stupid. Right. And so I tell my new board members, no, you have important decisions to make, and you have to make them on behalf of the whole building. So if you don't know, you got to ask. And we will get an expert in here and, to explain stuff to the board members so that they have an understanding of the facts and the situation so that they can make a decision, because that's what board members do. That's what they do in their meetings. They make decisions that affect the association. And we are not experts. And the law recognizes that we are not experts. So this is one of the things that they would learn in their training. And another thing that you just raised is conflict of interest, right? With board members who talk to their friends or talk to their family members, and somebody's got an Uncle Joe who's a plumber and say, oh, you got to do this for your plumbing, and they come to the board and board meeting and say, oh, my Uncle Joe who's a real great plumber, he says this is what we should do, and this is how much we should. That's stuff that should not be talked about in a board meeting. And I think if they go through the training, they will learn about that. They will also learn things about, how to avoid something called selective enforcement, right? Because that's one of the things that, we get into trouble. You guys hear a lot of complaints about how come the board, does this for, the homeowner, my neighbor, and they won't do it for me. I want, permission to do this and that. And you gave my neighbor permission to do it. So how come I can't do it? That's called selective enforcement of rules and regulations. And so, board members will learn that this is not permitted. And it would probably be a breach of their fiduciary duty. And I think a lot of people, when they get on the board, they don't understand that they are subject to these, standards. And, they think, oh, well, he's my best friend and he's my neighbor. I got to do this to help him. But, the person who lives, in another part of the building that I don't know, I don't care about him. So I don't have to, do the same for him, which is, maybe human, but it's not permitted by board members. But you guys hear complaints about it all the time, right?
Well, I think that it's important that the law tries to help in decision making, because they do know that you live close by to Joe or Nancy, and that you might have a conflict in the way you decide your actions. And so it says you cannot actually make any decision on your own. You have to come to a board meeting, and you have to do it as a collective, that the board votes, the board makes the decision. And I think that's really important, because then everybody gets to hear all of the comments, and then your best judgment is what everybody hears and decides upon. So it protects you as an individual, as well as your decision, that it was based on a lot of input, a lot of people ideas, and then you make a decision as a whole. And I think that's really quite important in the board functioning. And those are the kinds of things you would learn in a training program. That it really is for making good decisions, but also protecting the interests of, as Jane said, we're all volunteers on the board. So, you don't really want to go to court as somebody who's just trying to help out and be a good representative of my neighbors. So those are all important things that really you can't get from just reading your governing documents. Although the governing documents are important, you really do need training to know these other kinds of operating procedures that really make it easier for you to govern your condo. And that's the other thing I just wanted to add in is that when you are on the board, it is a responsibility and a duty, but it's an important one, as we do when we get elected to represent our district, is that you take it seriously. And so people who do want to run should be respected and supported in representing the interests of the people who live in that condo, because it is hard work and it is a responsibility that many don't want to take on. Yet I think that all owners should look at it as a way to give back, a way to take care of their condo and be more involved. Go to the condo meetings. That's where you hear, as Jane says, you hear what's happening in the building and you can give input. There is actually a section on every board meeting that, it's community concerns, where you do bring up some of the issues that can be handled by the board or the property manager or the building manager. So it's really important, again, to be involved, to know what's happening in your building. And as we ask for comments at the legislature on you testifying on some of these bills, likewise for your condo, when they put out an agenda and they say we're going to cover the rust or we're going to cover the groundskeeping, go to those, because your input is important for the board to make a good decision.
And one other thing, I guess, to address what happened in the Archer Lane thing, when the board posts a notice about structural repairs that are going to be made to the building, and the people that are going to speak at this, and I think they had town hall meetings on the structural repairs, and they had like a structural engineer actually show up and talk about what the repairs were going to do. Those kinds of meetings, you should have everybody. Either that, if they don't show up at these meetings, where they're talking about these expensive repairs, then they really have no right to complain later on if the board has to do a special assessment in order to pay for the repairs. So I think the One Archer Lane was a good lesson to owners and board members on what they have to do. The board members have got to get more people out to these town hall meetings where they're talking about expensive, work that's going to be done, that's going to cost the association lots of money. Yeah, and the owners, by the same token, have to recognize that, they got to, participate. They can't grumble after the decision's been made. They've got to participate in the process because they live there. They are, unit owners. They live there, and so when there's notices that go out that talk about these meetings on important issues, they need to participate. Either that, or they can't grumble after the board makes the decision, because I'm sure it was not an easy decision, because those board members also were subject to the special assessment that that they had to decide on. So it wasn't an easy decision for board members to make. And by the same token, the homeowner should appreciate the fact that the board members had to make the hard decision in order to make sure that these repairs are going to be made. You're talking about spalling problems, and that's exactly what happened in Florida. That's why that building collapsed, because people did not address spalling issues, and in fact, what that created the circumstances that made that building collapse on itself, because the underlying structure failed, right? And when that failed, the whole building came down. And so One Archer Lane, should be grateful that their board took the steps to get, the expert consultants to look at the building. And yeah, it cost them a lot of money. And maybe they could have avoided that by increasing maintenance fees earlier. But all of us who live in condos know if you increase the maintenance fees, you're going to get people grumbling. And, I think the grumblers have to start, recognizing that, this is part of their obligations in living in a condo. I mean, if you live in a single family home and you don't want to take care of it and it falls apart, that's your problem. But in a condominium, you don't have that right. You have a board that is tasked with the responsibility of keeping that building safe and sound, right? And for that, they have to take, special steps that affect everybody who has an ownership interest in the building.
I think two sides, Jane. One is that the board or its property manager should make every effort to not just an agenda, but to say this is what we're working on early on, and that board members who have concerns or can't pay, there be some way in which that can be looked at, whether it's installments or whatever it is, to help residents individually address the problem for the whole, and ways in which that could be done early on, so that I think what you're saying in terms of getting the information out there and owners getting more involved and knowing what's happening can prepare themselves early on instead of, at the last minute. So be more involved as owners as well as board members, making every effort to inform the owners that, hey, this is going to come up. You've got to be really aware of this and have several meetings if you need help, or things like that. Especially a lot of these older buildings have older people who are mixed incomes now, especially the older buildings that require a lot more capital improvement, really need to have, I think, a lot more maybe hand-holding in terms of how do we pay for it, as a collective as well as individually.
Right. And, we've run out of time, and I'm sure we could talk, a lot more about all of this, because I know with the legislature, with you as a legislator and me as an advocate, I mean, we deal with this every year, and it's been going on for years and years. And so I'm sure it's not going to go away, but hopefully this bill gets passed out and it will be part of the solution, to address some of the concerns that are coming to the legislators on an annual basis. So thank you very much for being our guest today.
Thank you, Jane.
And good luck with 729. And I'm sure you'll be back on our program again to talk about things that are near and dear to your heart and your constituents. So thank you so much, Senator.
Thank you, Jane. Aloha, and thank you, Condo Insider.
Yes, and thank you to our listeners for joining us today. And please join us next week for another informative show about condo living. Mahalo and aloha.
Aloha.
Thank you so much for watching ThinkTech Hawaii. If you like what we do, please like us and click the subscribe button on YouTube and the follow button on Vimeo. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and donate to us at thinktechhawaii.com. Mahalo.